Well, as the Indian economy faces a lot of headwinds, like much of the world's economies are at the moment, here to talk to us about these high prices of fuel, food and other commodities, the high inflation that India is seeing and economic growth overall, we have two former chief economic advisors on the program tonight. First, Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, who only months earlier stepped down as CEA to the Modi government. Mr. Subramanian, thank you very much for joining us. I first wanted to ask you about this battle between centre and the states over fuel taxes. Over the weekend, the centre reduced taxes on petrol and diesel, which is a relief for the common man. But a lot of states are also pushing back. Some have reduced VAT, which they can, but others are pushing back, like Tamil Nadu. We just had the finance minister on, who was saying that the centre had hiked taxes so much from 2014 and that this doesn't really go very far. How should we see this?
Nidhi, I think we have to look at this using facts. I'm going to take a couple of examples. Let's take Maharashtra and compare it to a neighboring state, Gujarat. Even after the 2 rupee cut that has happened, that Maharashtra has done yesterday, the state taxes that Maharashtra has per litre is 29 rupees. In contrast, for Gujarat, it is 12 rupees. And if you take on average, actually about 60 rupees is, let's say, is overall taxes. That means they're actually looking at almost half the share of it being states and half being centre. And the centre has already cut. So I think, when you look at the facts and also, I don't think the economic theory is any different for states versus centre. Much like if states have to balance their budget, centre has to do that as well. And, if almost half of these taxes are being accounted for, by state level taxes, I think then, I think the point is very clear. Similarly, if you look at let me take one more example, West Bengal. West Bengal's, petrol basically per litre tax is 26 rupees. A neighboring state, Assam, is only 12 rupees. That's about 2.5 times more. You take Rajasthan and compare it to UP. Rajasthan is basically 24.5 rupees. Taking into account actually the change, the 2.5 rupees cut they've done. In contrast, UP is at 15 rupees. So I think if you look at, there are many states who actually have reduced their VAT significantly. And, and I think when you look at the facts, I think you can clearly separate what is, what is the fact and what is the narrative and who's walking the talk and who's only talking.
Well, the complaint by the Tamil Nadu finance minister is that there is no consultation by the centre, that it's only a talk-down approach. So do you think that a change in approach is needed so that there is genuine cooperative federalism?
See, these are aspects that I think I'm not going to comment upon, because that is actually the dynamic. When I was in government, I would have commented, but now I think I don't have visibility on that aspect. But what I will mention is that, decisions on eventually on VAT versus excise duty is basically the respective domain of the centre and the states. I think, when the centre has clearly cut, the excise duty and the facts that I'm pointing out, there's been 2 rounds of cut. If you remember, actually, the first round happened just before Diwali. And now if you look at then 5 rupees on petrol and now, 8 rupees, together 13 rupees. In contrast, many states, and especially those that actually, are the ones that I've mentioned, have not followed up. And I think, when you start looking at the facts, there's actually a lot of narrative building, which is quite different from the facts clearly. I think, and that's something that, middle class folks need to recognize, because eventually, unlike, let's say, the poor or the rich ended up saving during the COVID period because they couldn't consume. The poor are being given subsidies, for instance, food, 800 million people. It is the middle class that actually, will get the maximum benefit out of these excise duty cuts and the VAT cuts. So I think, on the one hand, either if these states are indeed caring for the middle class citizen, I think the facts are very clear.
But looking at the concerns about inflation, now the whole world is reeling from inflation. However, you see the US at a 40-year high, a cost of living crisis in Germany, the UK. Inflation is clearly not something that's hurting India alone. But there are many experts we've spoken to who say that as far as India is concerned, the combination of a high WPI inflation that's been in double digits now for 13 straight months and retail inflation which is at an 8-year high, that in particular is hurting India. How do you see this?
I actually focus on consumer price inflation because that is what eventually the consumer, people like you and me face. And that is what monetary policy also focuses on. Yes, some part of WPI inflation does get transmitted into CPI. In that context, I think we should, policymakers should focus on WPI as well. But outcome eventually is CPI inflation. And as you rightly mentioned, actually, this is a global phenomenon. And I must remind you, I think we are basically, we're just getting out of a crisis when, the Ukraine war happened. Ukraine war has actually meant that, for instance, Indonesia, put restrictions on exports of palm oil. You have sunflower oil getting impacted because Ukraine was a big supplier, and these are factors. So it's pertinent, therefore, to compare with a previous crisis. Take the global financial crisis. When the macroeconomic response was shambolic, you had basically for 18 months, double-digit inflation, fiscal deficit that was 2.5 times that of the peer economies. You had a 6% current account deficit. In contrast, very, very prudent policy during COVID has ensured that our macro fundamentals are good. As a result, India, even in this sort of a topsy-turvy or difficult and global environment, will be the fastest growing economy, and even in a relative sense will have lower inflation than other countries. Do remember 2% is the inflation that Europe and US have actually typically had. So for them to have 8% inflation is almost 4 times. In contrast, compared to the previous crisis period of about 14%, 13% inflation, now we're at 7.5%. So I think we need to, using facts and figures, recognize where good work is done and I think give credit where it's due, therefore.
At the end, let me ask you a semi-political question. Rahul Gandhi just days ago compared India to Sri Lanka. He said that India was going the Sri Lanka way. Is that apples and oranges here?
I can tell you, I don't know, where is that economics coming from. I can tell you for a fact that he's going to be proved wrong on this. I've just given you the facts, how we are much better than, so many economies, even the advanced economies. So I think this is just, clearly not based on economics. I don't think even he's ever studied economics. So I don't think I would take that seriously at all.
All right, Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, thank you very much for joining us on NDTV.